The Rangers have had a solid offseason so far, rebuilding so much of their bullpen. But there's still one question left facing them this winter. Who the heck is going to close? We'll talk about all that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Patrick, a creepingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Before we get into today's episode talking about who the heck is going to close for the Rangers, whether it's someone who they haven't signed yet, whether it's someone that's there already, or whether the Rangers are going to make another trade. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, the Rangers have done a really good job of remaking their bullpen, because heading into this offseason, they had 2 very good relievers, 1 fine reliever, but a bunch of not so great relievers to fill out the rest of that pen. And those 2 really good relievers and 1 pretty good reliever are free agents. And one of them is now gone. Jose Leclerc signing a 1-year, $10 million deal with the just the Athletics, which is honestly a lot more than I thought he would get. Now, part of that is due to him having, a rough first part of the year, Kirby Yates stepping into that closer role and not looking back. But overall, it's been a pretty solid tenure for Jose Leclerc with the Rangers, a World Series champion forever, a massive, massive part of that World Series championship run, pitching the best pitching of his life in the moments when the Rangers needed it most. I mean, that iconic moment, that fist pump of striking out John Singleton in the ALCS in Game 6, it's just, it's one of my favorite moments. And for a guy who was the longest tenured Ranger from the time that he signed with the organization, which I believe was back in 2012, might have been 2015. He'd been in the organization for a long time. I mean, heck, he was teammates with Prince Fielder and Wyatt Langford. I mean, he was a Ranger for a long time, and I'm wishing him nothing but the best there. But the Rangers still feels like they have one more thing to do this offseason. Once we were headed into last week, the start of last week, it was clear there were basically 2 things left. Figure out if the Rangers are going to sign Roki Sasaki, and then go get a closer. And that was about it. And the Rangers are not getting Roki Sasaki, and they might not end up getting a closer. We'll see what actually happens with that. There's a lot of posturing, a lot of talk about how the Rangers are so happy with what they've got right now, but they're willing to entertain, talks with a veteran closer. I feel like things have got to be still ongoing with Kirby Yates. I have no idea what exactly the market looks like, but I feel like he's going to get a multi-year deal, and the Rangers are $6 million away from hitting that luxury tax, sending them into the 3-year repeater rule. They've talked very openly, and Evan Grant has been very adamant that the Rangers are so adamant about not getting into that luxury tax, which we'll get into when we talk about these free agent options. But the point is, the Rangers have a lot of good options, but I'm not sure they have any great options at closer, which is why I think signing one is probably the best way to go about it. Now, let's look at these free agent candidates that are still left. Tanner Scott really set the market, signing a 4-year deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers for $72 million. That's $18 million a year. That is the top end of the market. He was the best closer on the market, and it was not particularly close. I don't think anyone's going to get 4 years that's left on this market. I don't think anyone's going to get close to $18 million per year. Now, I know there are some deferrals in there because it's the Dodgers and that's just what they're doing nowadays, but Everybody else on this market, the deals are pretty similar. I mean, Jeff Hoffman has been one of the better relievers for, people keep saying the last 2 years, but basically it's been a year and a half. But for a reliever, that is a long stretch. He signed a 3-year deal with the Toronto Blue Jays, 3 years, $33 million, so $11 million per year. The only other reliever to get more money than that per year, more than $11 million, was Clay Holmes, who's going to apparently be a starter with the Mets for a little bit. 3 years, $38 million. That's $12 million per year. He might end up not being a good starter and then just put him in the bullpen. And even then, a little under $13 million. It's not that bad a price. And for the people who are left on this market, there's not all that many that I think would send the Rangers into the luxury tax that they would at least consider, which would be anything more than basically $6 million. But here are those over luxury tax guys that I think the Rangers could and maybe will, and I think should consider. Kirby Yates is first and foremost. I think that, he's going to get more than $11 million per year. I feel pretty confident in saying that. AJ Minter and Blake Trinan both got basically the exact same deal, 2 years and $22 million, so $11 million per year. Trinan is a little bit younger than Kirby Yates, but I don't think he's ever really had quite as good a season as Yates. Minter is coming off of hip microfracture surgery. It was a very complicated surgery. He had issues with his shoulder as well. I mean, he had impingement in his hip, torn labrum, and a lesion on Minter's femur. They had to do microfracture surgery, so he missed quite a bit of time last year. I'm not sure exactly how healthy he's going to be. He's also a lefty and quite a bit younger than Kirby Yates, but I don't see Yates getting less than $11 million. Again, even if he did sign that exact deal, the Rangers would be paying somewhere around $2 to $4 million in luxury tax, which is not that much, which would make him, cost about $15 million this year with all of the luxury tax, everything. They wouldn't be paying him $15 million, but with all the luxury tax add-ons, it would be about that much. It's really not that big a deal unless you're going into the $20 million or more over the luxury tax, which the Dodgers are well over. Their tax payroll is sitting at $375 million. I'm not asking the Rangers to get there. I don't think the Rangers by any means need to get there. I don't know if they honestly could get there with the free agents that are left on this market unless they did something like insane. I don't even think they could get to $300 million with who's left on this market. It doesn't seem physically possible. But signing one guy left, I think is worthy of going that much into the luxury tax. So maybe Kirby Yates is their best option. I talked about him versus David Robertson. Robertson would only cost you 1 year though. That's the thing with Robertson. He's been signing these 1-year deals for as long as he's been his own agent. It feels like it's been so long. The Rangers had a 1-and-1 mutual option for him to return in 2025. Kind of wish that he had taken that, but he wanted to explore the market. I think somewhere around $11-12 million is what he's going to get. He is a little bit on the older side, but he's consistent. I did a whole episode about Kirby Yates versus David Robertson if the Rangers could only keep one of them. They're both so good, and I'd be so happy if the Rangers got either of them. I don't think they need either of them to be competitive, but to go on a deep run, the Rangers need some more arms in that bullpen, and I think those two guys would be great options. The guy who I think is left on this market who is probably going to make the most money, who's left, I don't think he's going to make, he might get 4 years, but he's not getting $18 million a year. He's not getting Tanner Scott money. And that, of course, is the former Angels closer, Carlos Estevez. He had a pretty decent season last year. He was an all-star in 2023. That was the first time he was ever an all-star. Before that, he was with the Rockies. The Angels traded for him. He had a really good season. Felt a little fluky. I would be honestly terrified to sign this guy to a long-term deal. He's coming off a season with a sub 2.5 ERA. He's striking out fewer than a batter per inning. He doesn't walk guys, but he does give up some hard hit. He does give up some hard contact. He doesn't get, a whole lot of chase, a swing and miss out of the zone. He's 32 years old. I think he's probably going to hold out for at least a 3-year deal, someone will give that to him, but I sure shoot would not want it to be the Rangers. And then you have the guy who's probably going to get the most AAV on this list. That's Kenley Jansen. He's coming off of a pretty decent season. He'd been so consistent, had a 3.29 ERA with Boston, 27 saves, still well over a strikeout per inning, over 10 Ks per nine, around 3 1/3 walks per nine. That's not bad. Heading into his age 37 season, he's been just fairly consistent. I don't think he's going to get $16 million this year, but I was surprised last year when he got it, and he might get it again this year. Maybe he'll get somewhere closer to 15. I would be kind of terrified to sign him. He's been consistent, but that's just a lot of money for a closer. Again, there's no such thing as a bad one-year deal, but there's also such thing as not a great one-year deal. Those are the guys who I think will put the Rangers over the luxury tax. Of those four, I think Yates and Robertson are the only ones that I would feel comfortable doing so, that I think would be worth it to go over the luxury tax. But there are some other free agent options that I think the Rangers could pursue that would not put them over the luxury tax. Plus, we'll talk about some internal options and maybe even a trade candidate right after this. This show is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot that you were paying for twice? It definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I'll be talking about Jacob deGrom and what should the Rangers fans expect from him. Can he bounce back? Is he going to look like the best pitcher on earth this year that he did before he got Tommy John surgery? Now, let's look at some other free agent options for the Rangers at closer. Some guys who I don't think will put the Rangers into the luxury tax. These are guys who are going to make less than $6 million. The Rangers are just a little bit more than $6 million under that first luxury tax window, and the Rangers have talked all winter about how it's so important for them to stay under the luxury tax, which it shouldn't be. They're a top 5 market, top 4 market, honestly, in terms of media, in terms of TV households. And also, I think within the next couple weeks, Evan Grant was on a podcast and said that within the next couple weeks, he expects the Rangers to announce a deal with linear cable. So, even more money. They also have a big old deal with Victory Plus that I talked about last week when that went live, and how that's going to impact their finances. They haven't been, on the cheap end this winter. They spent $25 million a year for 3 years for Nathan Eovaldi. Even though that deal might end up looking bad at the end of it, still, I think, very much worth it. Was on the higher end of what I thought it would cost for Eovaldi, but again, if they really are so committed to staying under the luxury tax, there are some options to do it. And for the most part, I get it with not wanting to spend big money on closers, on back-end guys because they are so volatile. The Rangers got the second best reliever in all of baseball last year for $4.5 million. That was an absolute steal for Kirby Yates, and I don't think they're going to do that again this year. But here are some candidates if they wanted to try. Keenan Middleton is a guy who was very, very good with the White Sox, signed a 1-year deal with the St. Louis Cardinals, and then did not pitch at all for them. Middleton signed a 1-1 deal with the Cardinals, but he never ended up pitching for them. He underwent surgery to repair his flexor tendon, and he missed the entire 2024 season. He should be ready for opening day. Not entirely sure about his return timeline, but he made $5 million last year with a $1 million buyout, so I don't anticipate he's going to get more than $5 million after not pitching for an entire year. He's one of the younger guys that's on this list, 31.3 years old, so he's going to be heading into his age 32 season, I believe. He's a guy with a lot of promise, a lot of walks, a lot of strikeouts, some nasty stuff, which is something that I think this Rangers bullpen could definitely use. They've got some really good pitchers. They've got some solid pitchers. They don't have a lot of pitchers who I think are going to be bad next year, but they could use just a little bit more primo velocity, primo swing and miss stuff, and Middleton could definitely bring that. Another guy who could bring that is Ryan Stanek, who's coming off of a year with the Mets where he was fine. Maybe these guys that I'm listing here aren't necessarily closers, but it's just one more good arm in this pen, which is more important, more what I think this pen needs, of just one more high leverage guy, because you could always use one more. Stanek is a guy who blows fastballs by in triple digits, got a really nasty splitter, also got a decent slider as well, but mostly that fastball splitter combination. He spent part of last year with Seattle, part of last year with the Mets. He was with the Astros for a little bit before then, but he's been a solid reliever. He's got a lot of that swing and miss stuff. Mets fans were not particularly enthused with him, but Mets fans aren't particularly enthused about a lot of things. He was never going to close with how good of a closer in Edwin Diaz that the Mets have, or with Seattle with how good a closer in Andres Munoz they have. But he's a solid one more piece that I don't think is going to cost all that much, and he's still available. Kyle Finnegan is another option. He was DFA'd by the Washington Nationals because he was going to make, I think, close to $8 or so million in, maybe closer to 10 in arbitration had he not been DFA'd, because closers get expensive when they have all those saves in arbitration. That is a surefire way to rack up some money if you are a reliever in those arbitration hearings. They cut him loose, so maybe $5 million would be enough. He was a closer with Washington last year, and he was fine. He's been fine as a closer for the last few years. Not one of the ones with primo stuff, but I think could be a solid addition to this pen. Two more guys that I've talked about before. Danny Coulombe is a lefty who was with Baltimore, a Texas Tech grad, Reckham, who had a really good year. Has been kind of injured the last few seasons, but when he's been on the mound has been just downright nasty against lefties, against righties. He is a little bit on the older side. I think he's heading into his age 36 season. Doesn't have a whole lot of velocity, but he is so effective against righties, against lefties, getting swings and misses, getting soft contact. He's a guy who I think could make a lot of sense for the Rangers. And then Colin Poche, the local lefty lad, formerly of the Tampa Bay Rays, was going to cost too much in arbitration, which too much in arbitration for the Rays is like $3 million, maybe. I think he was making $2 million last year, and so a little bit of a raise was just too much for the Rays. Poche grew up in the DFW area in Flower Mound, went to Flower Mound Marcus High School, then spent some time at DBU, also spent some time at Arkansas. He's a guy who I think could fit really well in this pen. You know, decent strikeout rates, more than a strikeout per inning in his career. 4 seasons in the big leagues, missed a couple of years due to injury, but I think this guy could be a solid addition to the Rangers pen, and I don't think he'd cost all that much. He is another lefty, and the Rangers have a lot of lefties. But, you know, if you're looking for guys that are, you know, on the cheap, I think that Poche would be a solid option for the Rangers to pick up. In terms of trade candidates, there are some out there to be had, but I just don't see the Rangers making a move in terms of a trade for that one last reliever. I think the one trade that they were doing for a reliever is going to be that Nathaniel Lowe trade. You know, trading for Robert Garcia. I think he is a very good candidate. I'll talk more about him in the internal candidates in the next segment. But the only guys that really would make almost any sense are Ryan Helsley, but he's going to be making $8 million. He's only got 1 season left under control, and making a trade for a reliever just makes my skin crawl. They are some of the most lopsided trades. They have so much potential to go badly and so little potential to go right. He would push the Rangers over that luxury tax at $8 million. I don't see the Rangers doing that. The other possibilities are David Bednar, who's got a couple more years left to control. He was not good last year. He had been great in the past. He's a Pittsburgh native, and Pittsburgh loves him. If the Rangers think that they can get something out of him that Pittsburgh can't, maybe, but I think he would also push the Rangers over that luxury tax. And then Ryan Presley, who is a DFW native, who is with the Houston Astros, who only has 1 more year left on his deal. He'd cost the Rangers about $3.5 million in luxury tax. I don't think that he would be worth it. He has been on the market because the Astros are trying to shed some payroll. Trading with your biggest rival, always, especially for a reliever, always has a potential to go very, very badly. I don't think Houston's front office is as smart as it's been in years past, but still, they could very much get one over on you that would feel just so miserable for years to come if the Rangers traded a prospect for 1 year of a reliever that maybe he'd be great with the Rangers for a year, maybe he wouldn't. But for years and years to come, you would feel the effects of that trade. So let's look at the internal candidates, which seems like the most likely option. Who is in the Rangers' pen right now, and who are some prospects that could come up and close for the Rangers, maybe by season's end? Talk about all that and more right after this. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. Now, let's look at these World Series odds. I know you might be shocked, but the Dodgers are favored to win the World Series. They're now minus 270. They were plus 330 before these last two signings of Roki Sasaki and, of course, Tanner Scott, and their over-under of win totals. It's a ludicrous 103.5 wins. Over-under 103.5 wins. That's just absolutely insane. I have never seen an over-under that high. They've got all kinds of action on MLB. They've got all kinds of action on the NBA, on the NFL. Right now, the Super Bowl favorites are actually not the Chiefs, but the Philadelphia Eagles. You can go check out all the action on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, let's look at some internal candidates for the Rangers' role of closer. You have the most obvious candidates. They signed so many. They made so many different transactions to remake this bullpen, and they needed to. They really did. I mean, the Rangers had 3 decent relievers last year, and occasionally they had Josh Boris, who was solid. Leclerc had his moments. He did have his moments. Go look at his actual numbers before you talk about how he made you feel watching him, because he was actually effective. But Yates and Robertson were great. The rest of this bullpen made the Rangers one of the worst 5 bullpens in baseball last year, which didn't feel like it because the Rangers had one of the best relievers in baseball and one of the best setup men in baseball as well. But they needed more depth. They needed more guys you could count on to be solid. And they got a lot of those guys. And some of them might end up being great. Chris Martin, I think, is the most obvious candidate. If the Rangers go into spring training with exactly this roster, they don't make any more signings, no more trades, no more moves, I think that Chris Martin is for sure going to be the Rangers closer. And that's fine. I really don't think there's that big of a difference between the 8th inning and the 9th inning. Chris Martin has been phenomenal in the 8th inning in the last several seasons. He has been very, very consistent. He does not walk anybody. He does not give up hard contact. He gets swing and miss. He gets, strikeouts. He gets all of that good stuff. And he wanted to be here. And he signed a pretty friendly deal for how dang good he's been. Robert Garcia, I think, is the second best candidate. He's a lefty. He has got a nasty, nasty changeup. Doesn't have primo velocity and gas like that. I think the Rangers could definitely help improve his slider. They've done a good job of teaching their own pitching prospects how to throw more effective sliders. They've really done a good job last year of just taking guys who, they might have, really good curveballs or changeups or fastballs and just teaching them how to throw a more effective slider. And I think that Garcia, with a little bit improved slider, he can be even nastier against lefties, but he also is already pretty good against righties. The other group of candidates, I think those two, Martin and Garcia, those two are the best option for the Rangers to start the season as the Rangers closer. Maybe they'll finish the season as the Rangers closer too. But there are definitely some other prospects that I believe will be up at some point this year, helping the Rangers win games in the pen with some nasty stuff. There's that other group of 3 guys who I think will get a lot of high leverage outings in Jacob Webb, Shawn Armstrong, and Hoby Milner. I like all those guys. I think they're going to be pretty solid. I don't think that any of them are going to be terrible. Maybe one of them will be, and maybe one of them will be amazing, because that's just kind of how relievers go. But if those guys are your closer, those guys are your number 1 setup man, I don't feel great about it. But if those combination of three guys are getting your other high leverage spots that aren't going to Martin or Garcia or eventually Josh Boers whenever he gets healthy, I think that's a good place to be. I think it's a really solid middle end of the pen. And then the other two guys who Fangraphs predicts to make the Rangers roster, out of camp, makes the bullpen out of camp. Well, there's Dane Dunning as the long relief man. I don't see Dane Dunning closing any games for the Rangers. Maybe he'll get a save or two as just a 3-inning save, just kind of working the bulk of that bullpen. Maybe the Rangers are up 10-0, starter goes 6 innings, and they say, okay, Dunning, go mop up the last of these 3 innings because our bullpen's tired and we need this win. Maybe he'll get some saves that way, but I don't see Dunning coming in the 9th inning in a 1-run game and saving things out. But Jacob Latz and Daniel Robert are the other two options, and I think those are fine. Maybe Robert is going to end up making this pen. He was solid last year, not spectacular, but again, it was less than 6 innings, so it's too small of a sample size to really know much of anything about. With Latz, I don't know that there's enough swing and miss there. He started off the season really, really good, but the last half of the season, he just kept on getting lit up and lit up and lit up. I think he can be a fine low leverage reliever, but putting him in those higher leverage spots, what the Rangers did over and over again last year, he excelled in them early, but late, I think that teams kind of figured him out a little bit. I think he can be a solid, 5th inning low leverage guy, 6th inning low leverage guy. Maybe if the Rangers are down, he will keep them in a game. But he's not someone who I want in those super high leverage spots of a 1-run game in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th inning. It's just, I don't think that's what he's best at. But in terms of prospects, I think there are several that could jump up immediately and help this Rangers crew. But I think for most of the guys who could end up being that, they're going to get tried out as a starter. They're going to stay as a starter as long as they can. Those are the likes of Emiliano Teodo. That's Jack Leiter. I don't think Rocker is going to end up as a reliever, but maybe he does. I don't think so. Maybe he does. Maybe the Rangers put him in the pen late on in the season as a way to save his innings, to not force him to throw all that much. I don't think that's going to be the case. With Teodo, I bet he starts the year in AAA, and then if he just doesn't quite have that third pitch enough to get through the order multiple times, then maybe the Rangers just say, okay, let's put you in the pen right now and jump you right up to the big leagues, because right now he could get big league hitters out. He'd also probably walk a whole lot of big league hitters, but he's got that good of stuff that can play at the big league level right now. I know it can play right now. With Leiter, I bet he's going to start the season in AAA. The Rangers are going to see how much they can trust him to go through the order multiple times, to trust some of that secondary stuff, the curveball, the slider, the changeup, to throw those as strikes to keep hitters off of his very, very good fastball and keep that as an effective weapon, so that hitters don't just know if a pitch is a strike, it's going to be a fastball, and I can sit on it and crush it. And everything else I can just take because it's not going to be a strike. If that's the case, then maybe the Rangers just say, okay, well, Jack Leiter, we've given you all the time we can. Let's just put you in the pen and let you just gas it up to 100 miles an hour and, let that nasty off-speed stuff, not be thrown for strikes. Let it just be, big chase stuff and make him just a nasty, nasty reliever. Maybe that ends up being the case, but I know that's not how the season's going to start. So these guys who you have in the pen right now are going to have to start the season as the Rangers closer. I hope they don't make a trade for a reliever at midseason. I hope that just some of these internal guys just come up. I mean, Teodo, I think, is going to be the best reliever of this group. Maybe he sticks as a starter. He still has that ceiling of maybe a number 3 starter, but I don't know how much I trust it. But the floor is definitely very, very good reliever. As for Jose Corniel, I think he could also jump up into this Rangers pen. He missed all of last year after Tommy John surgery, and the innings load, it's been a while for him. He pitched in 2023 and he was fantastic, throwing over 100 innings that year. Maybe he ends up just being fast-tracked and pushed into the pen. I think I don't know if it's a likelihood. I think he'll probably start in Double-A. As for Winston Santos, I think he'll also start in Double-A. He could also be one of those guys that just becomes a 2-pitch pitcher. That fastball is so freaking good. The slider took a huge step forward. The changeup's solid, fine, maybe even plus. I haven't seen it quite enough to make a full judgment on it, but he could also be someone who helps this Rangers pen. you're more hoping that he's a starter. You're hoping that most of these guys are starters so the Rangers can just have a mostly homegrown rotation, but a few of them aren't going to be. A few of the Brockers, the Rosarios, Leiters, Teodos, Santoses of this farm system are going to end up being relievers, which is okay as long as they're nasty relievers, which I think they will be. I think all of these guys that were in my top 10 in terms of the pitchers, that's Rocker, that's Rosario, that's Leiter, that's Teodo, that's Santos, and I think that's all I had in my top 10. Actually, no, I also had Mitch Bratt. Bratt, I don't think would be a nasty reliever, but I feel more solid that he's going to be at least a number 4 or 5 starter. But the rest of those guys, that's how these other teams build these very, very good pens. They're starting pitching prospects. It's very hard for anybody to develop a starting pitcher that's homegrown. It's just so hard. But the good pitching development organizations, the guys that don't work out as good starting pitchers, the ones that are bad starting pitchers, they end up being really darn good relievers. It happens a lot. It happens to guys like Clay Holmes. It happened to, CJ Wilson was a good reliever turned good starter, which is very, very rare. But Neftali Feliz was a guy who was a good starting pitching prospect with the Rangers, just put in the pen. He was fantastic in the pen. I mean, that's what happens to these guys. And the Rangers haven't done that. They haven't had the pitching prospects that fail as starters that end up being nasty relievers. They just haven't done that. They really haven't. And so doing that with some of these guys, and hopefully others of them end up being decent starting pitchers, that's what the Rangers are hoping to do. That's how they're hoping to build their bullpen, as opposed to spending all that money. But for this year, for 1 year, if they could just, blow a massive offer, just get David Robertson for 1 more year to kind of hold them over, I think that would make them much, much better. It might not end up mattering because Skylar Hales is probably going to jump into this pen at some point. I'm hoping early on in the season. I'm assuming he might start the year in AAA, and then he could be up in the big leagues. He could end up breaking camp with the Rangers. That's entirely possible. The relievers are always the fastest movers through the system. He's got a fastball that sits in the triple digits. That slider needs to land it for strikes a little bit more often so that hitters will respect it and chase it out of the zone. But he's a guy who's, touches 100 miles an hour, who's got, all the great qualities on the fastball that you would like to see. And if that slider becomes a real weapon, then, look out, because the Rangers could start having some of those nasty back-end relievers that are homegrown, that don't cost that much. That is how teams build the most effective bullpens. Will they end up doing it this year? It's a little too soon to say, but all the work they did, I feel very good about it. I'd feel better if they brought back Kirby Yates on a 1-2 year deal, or David Robertson on a 1 or 2 year deal. Maybe taking a swing at one of those Keenan Middletons or Colin Poche's or Danny Coulombs might be the way to go. But even if they don't do anything else, they kind of need a closer, but at the same time, they also really don't. So what I'm trying to say is this is a great job of rebuilding a bullpen basically from scratch. And even if they don't get one more bullpen piece, I think that Chris Martin would be a more than capable closer. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.